Blog Talk Radio.
We are BR on the World, a news program from the international perspective looking at politics, economics, sport from the perspective of ordinary people in Lagos, in Nigeria, Palestine, and the West Bank, Italy, Spain, the Russian Federation, across the vast country known as China, from Beijing to Shanghai, Iraq to Timbuktu, and over to Los Angeles, Toronto in Canada, the Aboriginal people of the Western Hemisphere, to Brazil, Cuba, and the process of leadership across the world, not just in the so-called democracies, but in the body politic of countries and their traditional cultural heritage. This is what we attempt, our grand experiment today from New York. This is the News in 10 on the 8th day of October 2013. Bostonred here. As our new introductory lead-in says, we are an international news program with commentary, and it's developing, and the news is coming from around the world. And tonight we'll hear from, courtesy of BBC, Hamid Karzai. He's finishing his term as the president of Afghanistan, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. So we'll have a number of things, a little clip from the death of the former chief rabbi in the Israel. Here we'll fall back upon the Jewish press, Reb Ovandia. Nonetheless, he died. 850,000 people were at his funeral, and we'll just get to that right now, and then we'll go with the rest of it. More than 10% of the Israeli public crowded the streets of Jerusalem for the funeral of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. He was born in Baghdad, and he was a rabbi to the Jewish people that were from the Arab countries. It estimated 1 million Mormons passed through the capital before the funeral is over. The body arrived at the cemetery shortly before 10 p.m. Reb Ovandia. And let's see. After 5 funeral processions began, the burial was over. Hundreds of people simply parked their cars in the middle of the street to reach by foot the funeral procession. Yosef's widow is survived by 10 of his 11 children and several dozen grandchildren, great-grandchildren, so forth there. And his son is let me go in too fast here, the chief Sephardic rabbi that was by his father once had Rabbi Yosef there. Media around the world reporting the death of Reb Ovindia. Even the Gulf Times, based in the United Arab Emirates, and of course we are reporting it also. Nonetheless, he formed a very important political party, and how we go along. Who will lead us now? U.S. Ambassador Dan Shapiro said. Reb Ovidia Yusuf was a spiritual leader to hundreds of thousands, if not more, a great leader of learner of Torah, and a wise and learned man, a father to impressive family, important contributor to Israeli society and politics. We'll get to the Al Jazeera tribute also to him. The story was covered. So the story was covered in many facets at many places in the world. We'll just zip to that very quickly here, and then we'll go to El Shabazz. Interesting transition in the news, but we attempt to He was a controversial rabbi, according to Al Jazeera. Redefined Israeli politics, no doubt about that. Nothing but complicated. A few of its icons have been quite as powerful and paradoxical and controversial as Rabbi Ovida Yusef. Of course, he died. He provided spiritual leadership to the Sahar, a political party that turned the long marginalized Mahat Jews who immigrated to Israel from Arab lands into kingmakers in the political establishment dominated by European Jews. Also provided key political support to the then embattled Rabin, Yitzhak Rabin, on the Oslo Peace Accords. But he also strengthened the power of the ultra-Orthodox in Israeli society and issued a string of harsh, intolerant statements about non-Jews. Yusef was known both for introducing some of the boldest and most permissive edicts in Orthodox Judaism, and also for championing religious conservatism against secular trends. He became a rabbi at 20. He was the chief Sephardic rabbi at 52, dedicating most of his scholarship to improving the standings of Mahdi in the complex world of Orthodox theology, and I'm mispronouncing that. I apologize for that. He was born in Baghdad in 1920, died in 92. He moved his parents to the British Mandate of Palestine. His rabbinical career was defined by a commitment to find the most humane solutions possible with a strict Orthodox reading of Jewish law. And we already covered his son here, so we won't, as they say, duplicate things. The early 80s, Yusef retired as the chief rabbi, but remained a rabbinical judge, and at the same time he became the leader of the Council of Sages that offers spiritual guidance to the newly Sephardic party there. So he achieved the kingmaker role through his agility in playing the Likud Labor deadlock. Likud ultra-right party. Shah became a fixture in the coalition led by both Labor and Likud. So they played both sides against the middle over the past decade. The pragmatic and moderate Shah leader, that's S-H-A-S leader, and Yusef, a protege, Dire, fell from power on corruption. Well, that happens also. So that is the rabbi there, and we'll go now, staying in the Mideast area, to you can see on our deal here, along with the procession for Rabbi Yusef. The El Shabazz is marching in, presence in Boawi. You can see them marching in, 200 mass types, so evidently they were not hiding from anyone. So they are now in a bunch of small hamlets across Somalia. And the SEALs, the American SEALs, were searching. Let's see, get his name here. Kurima, who they say is usually accompanied by about 20 armed people. But nonetheless, they went into this is the SEALs, into a small village, and they found no one of it except for evidently a gunfight. Early approached Villa via the Indian Ocean, where Karma is said to be staying from time to time. They were putting up a ladder outside the building. A guard reportedly sounded the alarm, leading to exchange of 20-minute gunfight. They then withdrew. This is the SEALs, jumped in their speedboats and went away from the town. 180 kilometers, that's 110 miles south of Mogadishu. So this has been the history of U.S. forces in Somalia. It's not been, as they say, a victorious time to be there. But nonetheless, Egyptians attacked security forces. This is from the BBC, incidentally. At least 9 Egyptian soldiers and police officers have been killed in 2 attacks in different regions. So the fights go on. This one was hit by rockets. Also hit a state-run satellite station in Cairo. So the fight is on. Car bomb 3 police officers in Sinai, and also masked men killed 6 soldiers in a patrol car outside Suez Canal, then in Ismailia. So Egypt is, as they say, tumbled into an on-the-ground thing by various forces there. The Muslim Brotherhood has been banned, but they were banned for many years, starting back with Abu Nasser. The Nigerian magazine lists 55 billionaires. These are African billionaires, far more than I thought there, including 3 women. The mother of the Kenyan president, a daughter of the Angolan president, and a Nigerian oil tycoon and fashion designer. The richest man is Nigeria's Dangote, Akino Dangote. He supposedly has a fortune of $20 billion. That's 12.5 billion pounds. He's wealthy enough. The other 55.20 are Nigerians, 9 are South Africans, 8 are Egyptians. So it goes. This is sort of like in the U.S., the old Jet magazine used to list prosperous African Americans, not billionaires, obviously. But it doesn't matter as much as how many billionaires a region or a country produced in the U.S. There are more than ever. And there's the 1%. So we can sort of look at that, but that is not really where the action is. We're looking at the Asian news. We've already basically talked about news out of Asia. That's Afghanistan. We've covered that. Let's look at Latin America here while we're with the BBC. There. The Argentine president to have surgery. The Argentine president, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, will undergo surgery on Tuesday to treat bleeding, on the brain. She's 60 years old, and they will see. There's headaches, they said, were caused by that. Irregular heartbeat, headaches. I know somebody that has those. Hospital treating her on Monday said she's experienced slight loss of muscle strength in her left arm and recommended surgery. So it goes with the Argentines, and look at our time here. It is kind of rolling away, but nonetheless, we'll get on back to Al Jazeera and the rest of the news. We are moving from fort to fort here. We'll get to various tribes have called for the name to change of the Washington team. And the owner of that team, one Dan Snyder, says he will not change the name. The National Football League said it will meet representatives of an Indian tribe from New York. And the Oneida tribe is spearheading a campaign to get the name changed. The Washington team is a painful epithet that was used against my people, Indian people. This is according to Ray Halbida there. And also at the symposium was Betty McCullough, a representative from Minnesota, said the league and teams are promoting a racial slur. She is a part Aboriginal. There are a number of Aboriginal people in the Congress, and that's also the Atlanta team that goes to them. The team actually had its birth in Boston. I didn't know that myself, having been around here for a long time. Where they were first nicknamed the Braves, then they played in their home ballpark, then the Boston Braves. When they relocated in 1933 to Fenway Park, the home of the rival Red Sox, the name was changed there, and it was retained when the club moved in 1937 to D.C. They've been in D.C. ever since. 6 months after the move, volunteer band was formed, and trademark song, Hail to the Reds. I'm cleaning it up here a little bit. And lyrics of the Braves on the warpath and all of this mess. So in other words, we've not become more civilized in our sport, period. There's also a struggle going on in Canada. I'll get that. Here we go. I Don't Know More is busy in Canada. These are the indigenous tribes, Aboriginals in Canada. The past few weeks, First Nation group in Canada has set up roadblocks to stop gas exports in New Brunswick, marching outside the Ottawa Prime Minister's house to protest high mercury levels and force a coal mining company in British Columbia to delay drilling. The protests are part of a growing First Nation activism that took place in Canada last winter. We covered that on Bostonred, known as I Don't Know More. On Monday, they'll take their message to a wider public with 50 events planned and that was today. As we record this, we're moving into Tuesday across the U.S., and we'll have more coverage on that, including England and India. They marked the 250th anniversary of the British Proclamation, which led to the forming of Canada. Activists are hoping for a reset on relations between the Aboriginals and non-Aboriginal people. Monday coincides with the arrival of the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights. They've been campaigning for this for a very long time. I Don't Know More began. The story goes with a flurry of emails amongst 4 women in Saskatchewan. They worried about a new piece of federal legislation. In Canada, you have the provinces and, of course, the federal government. The name is C-45, which erodes indigenous rights and strips environmental safeguards that protect water, land, and air quality. Hefty price of legislation known as the Omnibus Budget Bill, which meant to change the Indian Act, the Navigation Protection Act, and the Environmental Act. In November, they began holding meetings there. And the first National Day, of course, was in December. We remember that. And Teresa Spence, she is a chief of the Anawati First Nation in Ontario, went on a hunger strike. The results was a cross-country Aboriginal protest that was unprecedented. It was a perfect storm, and after the winter protests, after a winter of I Don't Know More started to fizzle out. Well, they're back now. Spence agreed to end a hunger strike that was in January after a meeting with the Prime Minister Stephen Harper. She explained that online tools like Twitter and Facebook have helped bring together Aboriginal activists scattered across Canada. In the past year, there have been more of a representation in the media of our voice, says Violet, I guess, who works as educator in Montreal. The women of I Don't Know More. I Don't Know More appears to have slowed. There still plenty of action behind the scene. One evening last month, Melissa Mullen, Depunis, gathered with a dozen First Nation women. Depunis, a 35-year-old Inuk, Indian who lives near Montreal, started a Quebec chapter there. And so it goes. These activists are busy. In Canada, there are 1.4 million Aboriginal people, which make up 4% of the population in Canada. Poverty, however, is rampant. There's a disproportionate high number of missing and murdered Native women in Canada. The apparent lack of law enforcement to take the issue is a major concern amongst the protesters, despite all these grim numbers. Thomas Mueller sees the cause for optimism. He's encouraged by events like the Reconciliation March in Vancouver last month, that's out in British Columbia, which drew 70,000 people despite the rain. He contends that I Don't Know More will one day be looked upon as a turning point in Canadian history, and we are proud to report it here. So we move along in this world. We go on now to a brief video of the Rabbi Yosef and an interview with Hamid Karzai. I'm sorry. I'll get him right in a minute here. Fumbling up a few names. We'll have to go to the BBC's pronunciation guidelines. There, nonetheless, the UN chief outlined the chemical weapon plans for Syria. They're moving right along with their situation. The APAC nations are meeting. President Obama wasn't there because of the shutdown. But nonetheless, he was there in spirit. Long and costly process of destroying chemical weapons. Nuclear weapons also cost quite a bit. Beneath cement and earth bunkers in Kentucky and Colorado sat, 6.2 million pounds of debilitating and deadly chemical weapons. These U.S. Military rockets, mortar shells, bulk containers remain one of the biggest such arsenals left in the world. But like the other, 90% of the American stockpile has been, of the remaining arsenal is said to is slated to be destroyed in the coming decade. So in actuality, the Americans have more of these so-called chemical weapons than anyone else. Kathy DeWeese, spokesman for the Army, assembled the Chemical Weapon Alternative Program, which is overseeing the construction of the final two U.S. destruction facilities. Since 1990, workers in robots and plants in 6 states and the middle of the Pacific have been systematically destroying some 55 million pounds of liquid VX sarin gas, mustard gas, and various other stuff. While the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have started its UN-backed mission in Syria to secure and monitor the arsenal there of an estimated £2 million. It's worth nothing. Noting that the U.S. and Russia, the countries that brokered the deal, have yet to fully destroy their stockpiles. No doubt about that. And I'm glad we have it here. And we'll try to get this picture down here. The final 10% of the American chemical weapons stockpile will meet its end in 2 plants that are being built in Kentucky and Colorado. And hopefully we can get some pictures there. And we'll continue to cover this story because it is indeed a very big story. This is Bostonred for the News in 10. Good day.
With the ongoing effort until the last minute, the Rav has passed away a few minutes ago.
השם מברך אתכם. כל מי שאוהב את התורה, השם מברך אותו ויעלה מעלה מעלה. שאיתנו אוהבינו ושונאינו, אבו מאזן וכל הרשעים האלה כולם ירדו מן העולם.
Argue with Americans about a bilateral security agreement to define post-war relations. Its president continues to be an ally one day and an opponent the next.
Hamid Karzai has had very troubled relationships with his Western backers. Whether fighting the Taliban or nation building, he's often had very different objectives. Now there's only 6 months left until elections for his successor. So what does he really think about the United States, the Taliban, of Britain's war in Helmand? Is he at all bothered by the enormous levels of corruption here, or by women's rights? In one of his last major interviews as president, Hamid Karzai has agreed to speak to Newsnight. There's no doubt that the country has grown, developed and come a long way in the last 12 years. Why then do the Americans, President Obama, call you an unreliable, ineffective partner?
Because where they want us to go along, we don't go along. They want us to keep silent when civilians are killed. We will not, we cannot.
Isn't it the case that your relationship with President Bush was better than your relationship with Obama because his main focus has been the exit strategy? How has that been for you?
I had a very good relationship with President Bush, and those beginning years, there was not much difference of opinion between us. The worsening of relations began actually in 2005, where we saw the first incidents of civilian casualties, where we saw that the war on terror was not conducted where it should have been, which was in the sanctuaries, in the training grounds beyond Afghanistan. Rather than that, the US and NATO forces were conducting operations in Afghan villages, causing harm to Afghan people.
Are you talking to the Taliban yourself personally?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We have our whole system engaged in several directions to bring stability and peace to Afghanistan.
Is the goal to bring them into some kind of power-sharing deal in government?
Absolutely. There are Afghans where the Afghan president, where the Afghan government can appoint the Taliban to a government job, they're welcome, we will do that. But where it's the Afghan people appointing people through elections to state organs, then the Taliban should come and participate in elections. So to clarify this, yes, as Afghans, they are welcome to the Afghan government, like all other Afghans. Yes, as Afghans, they are welcome to participate in elections as all other Afghans.
A British audience or an American audience watching this would wonder, what was all this for then? 12 years of fighting, lives lost, and the Taliban would just walk back in and be part of government.
Well, the Americans have told us themselves in Washington in my last visit that the Taliban are not their enemies, that they will not fight the Taliban anymore.
What are you discussing at the moment with the Taliban? I mean, what's up for negotiation? What's at stake?
If the Taliban have reasons for which they cannot come, they must spell this out. If it is the Afghan constitution, they must come up and talk to us, and then allow the Afghan people, and through the mechanisms that we have, to amend the constitution.
The gains that women have made in this country are tenuous. Surely by bringing the Taliban back, you're compromising those gains.
The return of the Taliban will not undermine the progress. This country needs to have peace.
But you know where they stand with women's rights. I mean, are you willing to sacrifice women's rights?
I'm willing to stand for anything that will bring peace to Afghanistan, and through that to promote the cause of the Afghan women better.
So
there is no doubt about that. Even if the Taliban come, that will not end, that will not slow down.
So women in Afghanistan should not have the fear of a return of the Taliban?
None at all. None.
The bilateral security agreement, Mr. President, let's talk about that. That defines the US and Afghanistan's relationship beyond withdrawal. And if you push too hard, they may not stay. Is that something that worries you?
Well, if the agreement doesn't suit us, then of course they can leave. The agreement has to suit Afghanistan's interests and purposes. If it doesn't suit us, and if it doesn't suit them, then naturally we will go separate ways.
You may not sign this bilateral
If this agreement does not
agreement.
provide Afghanistan peace and security, the Afghans will not want it. That's very clear.
Britain has made a massive contribution already. Can you tell the British public, you know, what all their sacrifices were for? Because they don't understand why they're still here.
All the prime ministers that came, were in office in the past 12 years, have clearly stated that they are here in Afghanistan in order to provide security to the West, in order to prevent terrorism from reaching the West, in order to fight extremism here. How much of that has been achieved is a question that the British government can answer it alone.
Could you assess for me the criticism and failings that were experienced in Helmand?
It's not only Britain. On security front, the entire NATO exercise was one that caused Afghanistan a lot of suffering and a lot of loss of life, and no gains because the country is not secure. I'm not happy to say that, well, there is partial security. That's not what we are seeking. What we wanted was absolute security and a clear-cut war against terrorism.
Let's go back to your legacy. Some people would say that your legacy here in office has been tainted by the corruption in this country, that Afghanistan is the third most corrupt country in the world. Is that a legacy you want to leave behind?
No, not at all. Of course not. Our government is weak and ineffective in comparison to other governments. We've just begun. But the big corruption, the hundreds of millions of dollars of corruption, it was not Afghan. Now everybody knows that. It was foreign, the contracts, the subcontracts, the blind contracts given to people, money thrown around to buy loyalties, money thrown around to buy submissiveness of Afghan government officials to policies and designs that the Afghans would have not agreed to. That was the major part of corruption.
And finally, there isn't a single living Afghan leader. They've all been killed in a very violent way. Are you concerned about your safety when you leave office?
Not at all, no. I'll be safe.
President Karzai, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.